Hello, and welcome to Rock, Paper, Swords, the historical action and adventure podcast. My name is Matthew Harvey.
And my name is Stephen A. Mackay.
We're both best-selling historical fiction authors, and together we chat about all things historical and anything that could fall under the banner of action and adventure in books, film, TV, and games.
Oh, and we also talk about rock music from time to time.
Each episode we cover different aspects of history, from the quirky to the almost unbelievable. We also talk about writing, not only with each other, but also with guest authors. On today's episode, we're pleased to welcome Australian author Prue Batten. Prue is the author of 12 novels, starting with a fantasy series, Chronicles of Erie. She went on to write several historical fiction books set in medieval Europe. These are the Gisborne Saga, the Triptych Chronicle, and her latest series, the Peregrinus trilogy that starts with Reliquary, released in 2021. In 2019, Prue moved away from historical and fantasy and wrote a contemporary novel, Passage. Prue has also written a children's book, Nugget, and the non-fiction work, The Pillow Book of Prudence in 2020. Welcome, Prue.
Thank you very much, Matthew. Hi, Stephen.
And it's lovely to meet you because we've spoken a lot online and via email and Facebook, but never have we met face to face.
It's actually a real privilege. It's great to meet both of you because you've been part of my reading life for a long time, let alone my writing life.
I think we've been part of many writers. We've all sort of interacted a lot, and with loads of different writers and obviously readers as well online. And it's an amazing thing, actually, that in this day and age we can now speak to each other and see each other's faces over thousands of miles.
It is. It's incredible.
You said 10 years, Stephen?
Well, for me it has. So I assume you two are both roughly the same. We've been interacting with each other, right?
Mine's about 2010, so what's that, 12 years? 12, yeah. So in the glory days, they were the glory days back then. I think it's very different now.
That's
very
interesting.
Different.
That's an interesting conversation in itself. There, the whole thing of what were the glory days of the genres that we're writing in, and because I didn't actually publish until 2015 and self-published the first book 2015. So for me, if the glory days of 2010, I never had the glory days.
But it obviously never worried you. I think 2010 for quite a large section of us was when indie publishing really came into its own, and it was something really special. And there was good quality. Obviously there's quality stuff out there now, but it's a saturated market now, and it's a lot harder to make your mark than it was back in those days. I think for me personally, I noticed a change in about 2016, 2017, and it's become a lot tougher to make it all work.
I don't know what happened. Something happened around 2017, because I know that by that point I was traditionally published. So I self-published the first couple of books, and then I was traditionally published after that. And most of my sales are still via ebook, so it's still very similar sort of model to the what it was when I was an indie writer as well. But the publishers and I noticed that the sales dropped massively over those years, that sort of 2016, 2017, across the board. And I think algorithms changed within Amazon, and Amazon did things differently. But from my own perspective, during the lockdowns of 2020 and 2021, my sales went through the roof. They went up massively over what they had been, the previous years. In fact, the best years I've had in terms of sales.
Everyone was stuck in their house, weren't they? So because I know I read a lot more during lockdown than I usually do, because I was just lying on the couch half the time because I was off work. So I was on Kindle Unlimited, getting books downloaded and reading all this stuff that I would never have read otherwise. So I suppose for authors it was a really good time. And I wrote more as well because I was in the house more.
For me, sales-wise, it definitely was better. How about for you, Prue? How did you find the lockdowns? I know in Australia it was a little bit different to the UK, but I know you still had
very much so. Yeah, each state here in Australia defined their own approach to COVID rather than the national government decreeing what would be. All the national government did really was put out JobKeeper, which was a financial package for people, and shutting our national borders. For the rest, it was the states. And so in our case, because I live on Tasmania, which is an island, we were very, very lucky. Our borders shut. We were a little island, and it was heaven, actually. And I think altogether, in the beginning, we had about 3 months of lockdown, and we thought we were doing it tough until we started watching what everybody else was doing year after year, you know. But in terms of writing, gosh, you're lucky that you actually did do more writing, I think, because I don't know, I just became aware. I think when you're told you can't go outside, and when you're told you can't do all the things that you used to do, you want to desperately. And so I'd be just not writing, I'd be just chafing for that period of time when I could get out and I'd really, really make the most of it. And suddenly I started to think, well, I want to see more of the great outdoors. I want to do more of this. I want to do more of that. And writing became second to me in that period. And it's actually, till comparatively recently, stayed second, which surprised me. I mean, my head would still be telling me stories, but the actual process and being disciplined enough to sit down at the computer and write just went out the window. And I blame it entirely on COVID. I can't think of any other reason.
I mean, it's interesting how it affects different people in different ways. The whole lockdown scenarios, you know, what we've been through as a planet, really, because I know each country's been different, but, you know, every country's really had their own lockdowns and tribulations, and it's been pretty awful for everybody over the last couple of years. But I understand what you're saying about wanting to spend more time outside and do more things, because I found myself, as our lockdowns started to ease, and then it looked like, you know, this year 2022, that we were going to be in a situation where things were open up again and you could go to the theatre and go to the cinema and do things. I was saying yes to everything. You know, people would contact me, or I'd see adverts for like bands to playing gigs locally that before I wouldn't probably have considered going to. And now it's like, yeah, I'm going to go. I've always wanted to see that band. I'm just going to go. And I've been buying tickets to things and going places and doing stuff. And in the last 6 months, I've been out more. I mean, I've done not much writing in the last 3 or 4 months because I've just been going to gigs and going to the theatre and going out. But I've been catching COVID as a result of it. You know, so I don't know. I don't know if it's a great idea, but yeah, I definitely have that feeling of I want to go out and do stuff. And me and my wife were just saying, you know, it's getting to the end of the summer here, and we're saying, you know, we need to slow things down, because like we can't just keep saying yes to everything. We got to get back into a routine.
Well, you see, I think you should be saying yes to everything, because life is finite and you've got to enjoy it while you can. So, you know, go out and do it.
I was the exact opposite. I actually loved lockdown, because one, I got to stay off work and I still get paid for it. And two, I've got children. They're quite young. So I got to spend every day with them, playing in the trampoline and stuff. It was mostly in summer that year that we were in lockdown. Spend every day playing with them and stuff. And then I would go and do some writing. And obviously that brings in more money again, because I would be writing stuff I wouldn't have written otherwise. So I actually loved lockdown, and that's why I ended up quitting my job, because I thought, why am I doing this job and I don't really like it, and I could go back to like just spend all day writing or whatever. So it's different for everybody. We're all three of us have got a different kind of look take on it.
It's really interesting, because during the lockdown period, I was I'm meeting online with people that we were working on the Serpent Sword project, trying to get it into a TV series, and most of them were in the situation that you're in, Stephen, which is they were stuck at home. Some of them, I think, you know, some of them were self-employed, whatever, so they weren't maybe getting paid in the same way, but they didn't have anything to do, so they were spending all of their time focusing on this project. And they were saying to me, we'd have these meetings, they'd say to me things like, you know, well, we're all just sitting around, we've got loads of time now, let's do this because we've got loads of time. But I had deadlines, because I had a contract to deliver books, so I was still writing just as much as ever. And my wife wasn't furloughed, so she was working full time but from home. So we were just working flat out, and everybody was saying to us, oh, it's great, we're just sitting in the garden, chilling out, doing nothing. And we were both just working full time. And even our teenage daughters, after the first couple of months, they both got jobs, or they both had jobs, part-time jobs in catering and things. So the things that were still open, that they were allowed to take away deliveries and stuff. So we were all working, and everybody was like saying, you know, we're all sitting around doing nothing.
Just lying on my couch all day.
Yeah. But moving on from COVID, though, because we could probably talk about COVID all day, but hopefully things are improving, and we're not going to have huge lockdowns again, but you never know.
Oh, no, you don't.
No, but anyway, moving on from that, I looking at your bio, Prue, I see that you were a journalist before you became a novelist. First question I actually had for you is, what type of journalist was it? Was it written journalism or some other?
It was broadcast journalism, radio and television.
Okay,
and it wasn't current affairs or anything exciting it was current affairs. It was actually rural current affairs, agricultural current affairs. Mm-hmm. And it was with the national broadcasters, so the Australian version of the BBC. Mm. And I started off as a research assistant because my qualifications were a librarianship. And very quickly, I was working in a department of men. Very quickly, the boss said, right, you can go on air, you can read the Wool Report, or you can go and, just do little things. And then gradually they let me record a few stories. I'd go out and I'd interview people and then bring them back, edit them, and then they'd be rolled out at midday. And I don't know if you have a program similar to what we have here. It's called the Country Hour, and it's purely for farming and regional people.
We used to, I don't know if we still do, but with Country File it was called, wasn't it?
Yeah, be similar to that, I reckon. And I loved it. I loved dealing with the country folk. I love farming anyway. And it was a really good life. Really loved it. And that's, of course, where I met my husband. So because he was also a journalist and for the same department. And but he was more television documentaries for that particular department. And anyway, it was a good life.
Oh, that's really interesting. So I didn't know, because I was going to ask you, if obviously you had to still create the stories for write up the stories and then present them. So had you always wanted to tell fictional stories? Was that something you always wanted to do, or is that something that sort of, how did that evolve?
Here comes the old cliche, Matthew. Yes, I've always wanted to tell stories. And even when I was a little girl, it was just something I did. I would love what they called in my day composition at school.
Yeah.
So, the teacher would say, all right, we're all going to write a little story now. Here's a picture. And she'd put it up on the blackboard. And we'd have to write a story about it. And I just loved it. It was just meant to be. And I loved reading as well. So, and when I got to university in English, no, it might have been before university, actually, matriculation. You'd have to write a short story during the 3-hour exam. And it used to get me into hellzone trouble because I'd be writing away, not answering all the other questions and completely forgetting about, the exam as such. I love writing. I loved writing then. I still love writing. And I'm writing again, which is lovely.
That's good. That's good. So as a journalist, and who now writes fiction, but based in reality, for not always, but you've done fantasy, but I think most of your writing, it's safe to say, is based in a reality, of historical reality, or even present day. How important for you is truth in historical fiction?
Gosh, I think I've talked about this with you before. It's ringing a bell. Obviously it's incredibly important, but I write in the 12th century, and the 12th century has pockets where it's not documented really well. And you write in the Dark Ages, which is probably the same thing. Mm-hmm. And, people that write about Vikings, you're dealing with truths to a point. So truth's important, but I think to tell a good story, you have to be able to bend the truth a little bit. And what is fiction? Let's face it.
Yeah, that's a good answer. I always think that fiction is more important.
Yeah, as long as it's a good story in the end.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm not a historian, and I'm not a non-fiction writer, and I never will be. So yeah, that's the quick answer to your question.
And you're lucky because you also write fantasy, so you can really make things up and nobody can say you're wrong.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's what I'm doing at the moment. I've actually switched genres for a while. And it is like, God, it's like a shot of adrenaline in the arm. It really is. Not to have to go racing off to the files and oh God, it's just wonderful. And also you can get a bit carried away with a lot more description than you can, because you're really, really building a world, as opposed to a world that most people know they can check on through, history and research and things like that. So, I mean, building a world in the 12th century, you still have to be very loyal to the time frame. So, yeah.
Yeah, and there's things, I mean, for me, one of the biggest things is geography. I mean, I've talked to Stephen about maps before, but, one of the things that I find, with writing historical fiction, and I have my people traveling all over the place, and you've got to kind of know where they are and what they're doing, and, where the hills are and where the sea is and where the rivers are and all of that stuff, because you can't really afford to get that wrong. And it really imposes often the story on you as well. So, you need the people to get from here to there. There's 300 miles of sea between them, and that dictates what the story is going to do next. Even if you don't want to write a sea voyage, you kind of have to, or at least mention it. And
one of your readers, no doubt, will live there, and if you get it wrong, they'll be quick to tell you. So you really have to.
Very much so.
I remember reading a review of, I think it was a James Wilde book. Somebody said, I stopped reading his series because the beach that he describes in some place in Frisia is wrong. Or something like that. Like,
it was a pebble beach rather than a sandy beach or something.
It was like that. It was like, so we stopped reading the whole series. I always stuck with
me. Oh my God.
Wow.
Yes,
that's crazy.
Yeah.
So you mentioned before, Prue, that you obviously you were really into the journalism of the countryside, and you met your husband working in the same field of journalism, and I believe you now work and own a farm. Is that correct, or is it your husband who works it and you just look? Watch. How does that work?
I did work on that. A few years before my husband retired from the ABC, we had a little talk, and we decided that what we'd like to do is, perhaps, because he's from a farming family, and he's always thought he'd like to go back to farming, and we decided to get a little farm. Might be within our bailiwick, that we could probably handle that as we aged. So we looked around and we found this little place, and it came up for sale, and we went to the auction, and we were very successful. Doing all the hard yard. And I remember one year, was my last I just said never again. It was summer and we were shearing, and so there were about 1,000 sheep going through the shed, and it was so hot. You talk about your summer that you've just had. It would have been 40 degrees, 45 in the shearing shed, and I was dying by inches, because I was actually what they call a rouseabout, which is the person that pulls the wool away as the sheep's being shorn. They pull the wool away, they sweep the board so that the board's clean when the shearer pulls the next sheep out. And it was so hot, and the sun was shining through a laser light roof. And I had a roll of paper towel, and I just kept dipping it in water and putting it around my neck. And we had a day of this. And I went home, and I think I sat on the couch for 3 hours. My husband got home and he said, "Where's dinner?" And I said, "Wherever, I don't care." And by the way, I'm never rousing again. It's time we got in some contract labour. And so that's what we did for a couple of years, for the hard jobs. My husband would still work there, and we got in some contract labour. But then our son and his wife moved out to live in the farmhouse. And he's really into farming in a big way. And so he's essentially taken over a lot of the heavy work for my husband, because we're in our 70s now. So, that's our excuse for backing away. And also, as you know,
I think you're allowed to slow down a little bit.
As you know, Passage was inspired by a terrible accident my husband had on the farm. And that probably distanced me even more, a little bit from what's involved with farming. I do get very nervous when I know my husband's working on the farm on his own, which he was on this particular day. I was a couple of paddocks away, but so we've still got the farm. Our son's working it mostly, and we've got a little grandson, and with good luck and a fair wind, hopefully the farm will stay in the family for a couple of generations. It's only small. It's not one of those great big Australian wool spreads, but it's a great little place.
1,000 sheep?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, that sounds quite big to me, 1,000.
Does it?
Sounds enormous. Well, Scotland, I don't know.
Oh, Stephen,
It
it's
sounds
not.
huge.
Seriously, a lot of a lot of the properties, the wool properties and meat and wool properties in Australia, you're talking 3,000, 5,000, 10,000,
Right.
maybe 30,000 sheep. So we are small biggies.
I don't know, just from driving past the fields near me, you know, I don't know how many sheep are in it. There's probably about 50 sheep at the very most, but I don't know, maybe they've got a few fields. But
well, we
still...
haven't got 1,000 anymore. We haven't got 1,000 anymore. They were wethers, castrated sheep.
All right.
We changed to breeding ewes, and because we've got breeding ewes, we've only got 500 breeding ewes now. And they're lambing. We started lambing this week. So by the end of lambing, if all the lambs lived, we'd probably have about 700 lambs, but they don't all live. I mean, that's a fact of life, you know. So yeah.
So all this is really interesting. I mean, talking obviously about modern farming, but the pattern of life of, you know, the ewes, lambing and all of these things, those things have always been the same. It doesn't matter whether in 21st century or the 12th century. How does the living on the farm and the working the farm, how does that inform your writing about medieval Europe?
Heaps, because it's, as you say, it's a very small step to mechanized farming from what has been around for centuries. So, you know, it's the smell of the sheep, it's the feel of the lanolin, it's the, you know, it's drawing a knife across a sheep's throat if they've got to be put down. It's watching a ewe lamb. I mean, occasionally, you know, my son or my husband might have to use hand shears on a sheep, and so you hear the click of the shears, and you know, you don't have to go far at all to put yourself in the 12th century and imagining it at all happening then. Yeah.
Well, that's a good question there, Matthew, because I was going to ask you that, Prue. Obviously, we live over here in Britain. We've got the landscape all around us, the bad weather, and you know, for us, it's quite easy to close our eyes and kind of feel like we're 1,000 years ago or whatever, and we're kind of in the country anyway, but you're quite a distance away in a completely different setting. So I just wonder how hard it is for you to kind of move your mindset.
Well, you do a lot of reading, obviously. And I've travelled to the UK. Not that much of mine takes place in the UK, actually. They're mostly France and Turkey, of all places. But yeah, you do a lot of reading. I have been really lucky, as Matthew knows, to have had the most wonderful man in France who I got to know via Facebook, of all things. And he was retired. And I asked a question on Facebook. If anybody knows where there's a Templar commandery somewhere in France, can they let me know? And I think that was the start of my relationship, my professional relationship with Brian, who lived in Lyon. He and his wife would travel right over France and Italy and lots of other places. And he said, I would love to do your research for you, housekeeper. And she took him on a tour right through this 12th century, because it had to be a 12th century commandery to fit in, Templar commandery. And from that moment on, Brian became my legs on the ground. He would film videos. He would say what the triboules in Lyon smelt like. I mean, he was amazing. I could not have written what I wrote without him. And I think that's another reason why my writing took a bit of a dive, because Brian sadly contracted pancreatic cancer and died in the middle of COVID. And that was, I mean, it was a tragedy. And it took me a long while to pick myself up. Fortunately, I've got all his notes and his videos and his letters and emails, everything, all filed away. And so if ever I want to go back to France in my novels, I've got it all there. And I also had a really good friend in Istanbul. And so she was able to do the groundwork for me in Constantinople. Because as you can imagine, if you're an indie writer and you've got to travel to research, you've got to travel to Europe, or you've got to travel to the Middle East, your profits are going to go down the gurgler very quickly. And so I had to be a little bit smart, really. And when help was offered, I just took it. And it's been great. And of course, COVID has shown many writers that you can actually write a good novel and research a good novel via Google.
Yeah, Google Maps or Wikipedia.
Yeah, Google Maps, everything, Stephen. That's exactly right. Yeah. And you can access really good academic papers online and you know.
Absolutely.
It's worked for me up till now anyway.
I find myself regularly having to sort of, I don't know, talk myself out of doing trips, really, because I writing about places in Britain, or if they're close by, you can get to them, but otherwise, you've got to take days out to go to travel. Yeah. Or I'm writing at the moment about the south of Spain, and I lived in Spain for a long time, and I'm watching videos on YouTube and think, I really would just love to jump on a plane and go for a couple of days, but then I think, well, I can't justify it, and it's just too much. And during lockdown, I wrote. You're talking about Lyon in France. I wrote the latest Beerbrand book, and they go to Lyon, and I've never been.
I'll be watching. I'll be watching.
Oh God, it's going to be awful. Anyway, you won't know because it was 7th century, so it's before So anyway, and I wanted to go, and it was all locked down, and I couldn't travel, and I was really cheesed off because it's like, oh God, normally if I read, because I didn't really plan it, but lots of the story ended up being in Lyon, and so it was just loads of old maps and looking at stuff and looking at Roman plans, and then the plans of like medieval, and trying to sort of extrapolate between the two. Trying to work out what it was in the 7th century, the Merovingian period, and just guessing really, but hopefully seems reasonable.
Well, Constantinople, 12th century Constantinople barely exists anymore, thanks to the Fourth Crusade. So that was a real trial, actually. And I have to say that Simon Turney, who knows Istanbul so well, like the back of his hand, he was amazing. And we would chat things through aspects of the landscape, and he would put me right there and say, well, this, and this. And then Gordon Doherty, whom you probably all both know too, he was writing about Constantinople as well, and he put me onto this amazing link, which is Byzantium 2000, and it's complete Byzantium 1200, sorry, and it's completely a complete mock-up of what Constantinople would have been like in the 12th century. I mean, I felt it was just made for me.
Was this on the computer, like computer graphics? Yeah. I think I've seen that.
Yeah.
It's amazing how you stumble on these things when you're looking for things, or somebody points you to them. There's another thing, I can't remember what it's called now, but we could Google it, maybe put it in the show notes of the. But the thing about the Roman Empire and traveling between different Roman sites, and it gives you the time, and you can choose whether you're traveling via horse or by land, or if you're a noble or whatever, or using trade routes, and it will tell you how long it took.
Was that in Britain, Matthew?
It's the whole of the Roman Empire. It covers.
Why have you never told me about this before?
I think you can get one for the medieval era as well. I mean, that's ringing a bell.
I'll have to look this up, because I usually use Google Maps, and I have to kind of mix it between a bike or a feet.
Well, this is it. So I've used the Roman one. I just thought, well, if it took 6 days to travel in the Roman times, I'm guessing it took about the same in maybe add an extra
tell me this link,
because I'll have a look. I think it's got the word Orbis in it, but I'm not sure. Anyway, Orbis Roman map I'm seeing on Google. Let's have a look. Yeah, it's from Stanford. It's orbis.stanford.edu. It's the Stanford Geospatial Network model of the Roman world. There you go. So we'll stick that in the show notes, and you can use it in future. And you can choose the type, the month that they're traveling, the season they're traveling.
All right, okay.
Whether they're traveling there's a fastest, cheapest, or shortest, whether they're going to use the open sea or coastal sea or rivers or roads, and whether they're civilians or all that sort of stuff. So it's really very useful
stuff.
You two might have found it for your books, but I also found a weather link. God, I wish I had it with me, but it was fabulous. So you could look right back and see what major events happened in Europe and the UK. So obviously I was looking for what was going on in the 12th century. And with Reliquary, God, that's so hard to say that name. I wish I'd never called the book that name. there were huge floods in France, and that just played beautifully for me.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Well, if you can find that link afterwards and email it to us,
Yeah,
we'll stick
I'll-
that in the
I'll-
show notes as well, and that
Yeah,
sounds really useful.
yeah.
Well, that's funny
Yeah.
how often something like that happens, Prue, where you're writing a story and you find some historical fact that actually just fits so perfect with what you need.
Absolutely.
That
Yeah.
happen quite often,
Yeah.
and it's just
Definitely.
strange.
I've got a bit like that in Wolf of Wessex, where when I was doing the research, I'd mapped out for the first time, I'd used a piece of software called Eon Timeline, and you can map out the events against the timeline. And it was the first time I'd used it for one of my books, and I'd really been careful and said the dates of things are happening. And when I started doing research, because I wanted to know whether it was a full moon or what, that sort of stuff,
Yeah.
because I thought, well, if I'm going to go to this level of detail, and I found out there was a partial eclipse of the moon on the day that I had Dunstan escaping from something. I thought, well, I've got to include that in the story now. You can't not.
Yeah.
It's amazing how these things just sort of drop into your lap, and you think,
Yeah,
well,
it's
that's
a
suddenly,
strange at times,
It's serendipity, it's called.
Mhm.
yeah, absolutely.
You mentioned Gordon and Simon there. That I think they're in this Inkslinger Veterans. Is that right?
Simon has been with us, but once he secured mainstream publication, his work schedule became so frenetic that he had to drop out.
Right. Okay.
But I think,
what is
I do know
Inkslingers
that Gordon and Simon are writing together. Inkslinger Veterans, it's a UK, basically a UK group. I'm obviously there by default, but we write short stories for anthologies, and the proceeds are actually used for raising money for cancer research in the UK.
That's great.
Which is great to be involved with. It really is. I've loved it.
Yeah.
So we haven't done it for a while, actually. It must be time for a new book.
There you go.
But money keeps drifting in, which is really lovely. And Rachel Dove, who's an English writer, she writes contemporary women's fiction. She does all the book work, and she keeps sending messages to us all, letting us know what the latest sales were, and the anthologies keep selling, which is
so you've
really
written short stories for
Yeah.
Inkslinger Veterans. You've also written fantasy, you've written historical fiction, and also Passage, the contemporary fiction. Which of those different genres did you most enjoy writing, and why, I guess? And which did you find most difficult?
Oh, golly gosh. Actually, to be honest, the most difficult was probably the contemporary fiction, because there is no room for error.
Yeah, exactly.
Everything you say, everybody knows how the computer works, how the phone, all this sort of stuff. They know. So there's no room for error. The other thing too is if you're writing a contemporary fiction like I did, based on an actual event that happened to my husband, which I sort of made into a pretty stark event in the novel, people then assume you're writing about your own life. And so you have to write pretty good author's notes to try and convince them that it's not really about you, and it's not about your friends and all this sort of stuff. So yes, I think that's the hardest one. And also I was really afraid that people out there, how at the beginning of every novel, a contemporary novel, people will say this is a work of fiction, no relation to people living or dead. Well, I put that in the front of mine and hope to God that people would believe it. But when you live in a small island like Tasmania, I wonder if people were drawing parallels with me, with people I know. And I was just waiting for the court cases.
Too terrible about anybody who could be
But they
traced
wouldn't
back to
happen,
anyone
thankfully,
specific.
Specific descriptions.
Oh dear. But I love writing historical fiction. I really do. It's always been the most favourite genre I've ever read. And to consider that I have actually been able to turn out 7 historical fiction novels, and some of them have won awards, which has been really nice. It's been a great feeling. And if I never write any more historical fiction again, I'll be fairly proud of what I've turned out, but I hope I can get back to it in the end.
You've got an awful lot of awards. I noticed that on your website. I had a look, and there's a whole row of them. So congratulations. It's nice to get that kind of reward?
Well, for me, Stephen, it was probably more important than actually selling the number of novels, because in most cases with those awards, you're being judged by the industry and by professional professors of literature. It's fairly heavy judging. And so I think if you manage to secure an award from any of those groups, you can be reasonably content that the product you're putting out is fairly good. So I try and always enter my novels when I finish them into certain competitions and awards, just to give myself peace of mind more than anything.
I've never really entered these things.
I've not won any awads. So where does that put me?
You two have probably got mega sales. So there you go.
Well, I'll have to be happy with the sales. Then, yeah.
Just don't enter in the ones I'm entering.
I remember my publisher put me forward for an award, action writing one. There's a Wilbur Smith action writing award thing, and they put the Wolf of Wessex up for that. And I thought, I knew Wolf of Wessex was special. It felt like a special book when I wrote it, and I thought this could do well. It's a standalone. It's all about sort of action and traveling, and the whole thing was about travel adventure, sort of historical and action adventure stuff. And I thought, I've really got a good chance for this. Maybe I'll get shortlisted, or even longlisted or whatever. And then it was COVID, and they said, we're going to scrap the award this year. And they scrapped it, and they said instead we're going to give the proceeds to help struggling writers. And I thought, well, what about me? I'm a struggling writer. I want a chance to win. But no.
You would have won, Matthew.
I would have won. I could tell myself
yourself for that thought.
Giles Christian's shortlisted this year for the same award. So, it's an annual award, but I just thought it was classic that the 1 year
I think that's really interesting that they cancelled it because of COVID, because you'd think they would still be able to judge.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's what I did. I couldn't work it out. Yeah. I was like, brilliant, great, thanks. Not that I might not have even got longlisted or anything, but to have it to sort of have that taken away as an option, you did feel a bit like, okay. But hey, such is life. That's first world problems.
Well, come on, Stephen, you've got to put your books forward now. So
I've got one of the ones you've got, the indie BRAG.
Yep.
So I've got a couple of those.
Oh, great.
I'm always worried that they won't win. So I just read the reviews.
I think I go. My whole approach to writing from the get-go and from indie publishing has been no expectations, none. Don't expect to sell. Don't expect to make a fortune. Don't expect to get any reviews. Don't expect anything.
Just enjoy the write.
Well, yeah, pretty well. And that's stayed with me, and that's the way it is now. It takes the pressure off too. I think if you sort of if you're worried about how many of us sold this week and all that sort of thing, it turns it into a bit of a nightmare.
It's a difficult thing. It's an interesting thing, because I agree with you that when I started, I didn't have any expectations, because I was working full time, and I started down the path and just thinking, well, if I sell 10 books, then great. If I sell 100, fantastic. If I sell 1,000, amazing. I don't know. I had no expectations. But obviously, as things progressed, and I got, I was selling well, and I'm writing full time. So obviously, I have to worry about the sales, because if I don't sell, I don't have a job.
Exactly.
So and Stephen's the same.
Yeah.
So
and I must be the type of person that looks at all this stuff all the time, because I actually do it with the podcast now, Matthew. I don't know about you.
Me too. I'm the same.
Constantly checking these rankings and how many listeners we've had today and stuff like that.
Oh, wow.
So
we're the same. Me and Stephen are the same. I think we could probably, at the end of every month, we could probably say that we've racked up between us probably like 100 hours of us just checking stats online. Because every time we talk, it's
checking
like,
the charts.
I know, if I like get a bestseller flag on a book, I know that Stephen will know before me. He's checking my stuff out. He's like, he's checking sales ranks.
Oh no, look, honestly, I'm not a layback person. I really am not. If anything, I'm quite anxious. And maybe that's why I don't check the stats anymore. Maybe it was the way I could keep writing without turning it into a nightmare. So
yeah, but when it comes to reviews, I would definitely agree with you, because like the 1-star reviews could really depress you and make you anxious. So years ago I stopped reading those too often. But I like to look at the charts, and I do worry about how many books pre-orders I'll get for this new book and things like that.
Yeah.
But I still enjoy the writing. I think that's the main thing. As long as you enjoy what you're doing and the research and things like that, then it's just like another job, but it's a fun job.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I keep having to tell myself, this is much better. Like when it gets difficult, because some days it's difficult to write, and I have to kind of force myself to write some days. And I think that's the main difference with becoming a full-time writer, is you feel that necessity to, I've got deadlines to hit, and I feel I have to write each day. And I don't think my schedule's as crazy as Simon Turney's, for example. I think he churns out more words than I do, and he releases.
Oh, he's frightening.
But but I still think that my schedule's still relentless. I feel like I've got to, once I start writing a book, I just 2,000 words a day, boom, 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 go through.
Wow.
Till I'm done it, and so some days it's difficult, but I just need to keep telling myself this is a much better, much better than most jobs, and it's a real privilege to
of course,
to have it. And no job is easy all the time, and in fact, if it was easy, it probably wouldn't be worth doing.
Exactly. Yeah, I
Everybody
agree
would
with
be
that.
doing it then. if it was easy, everybody would do it. Every week every podcast at the end, we always ask our guests a regular set of questions, and we ask each other as well. And so today is no exception. And the first question is, what have you been reading and watching in the last week or two, Prue?
Okay, well, reading, I've just actually, this will interest you both, because you're both interested in the Viking era. But I've just finished reading Juliet Morelia's Saga of the Light Isles. Now, she's a New Zealand writer living in Australia. Very, very, very well-known fantasy writer. And she wrote this, it's a duet, and she wrote it in, 2002 and 2004. So really before Vikings took off, I guess, in the book world. And it's set in Orkney back in the day, and I love them. They are terrific. I don't do blood and guts very well, as I've told you before, Matthew. I sometimes have to hide behind a pillow or whatever, or flick through the pages where, the innards are dropping out on the ground and all that sort of stuff. She doesn't use a lot of violence in her novels, and yet her narrative just flies along. So I really recommend those books to whomever might be interested. They are as valid now as they were in 2002 and 2004. Great books.
And just repeat the title, sorry.
It's the Saga of the Light Isles, and book 1 is called Wolfskin, and book 2 is called Fox Mask.
Okay, brilliant.
By Juliet Morelia. Yeah.
Okay.
So
great recommendation. Never heard of them or her, but it does sound great.
And then they were on my Kindle, and then I've just finished listening on audio to an Australian writer, actually, The Lost Flowers of Alice Hart by Holly Ringland. And the only reason I'm mentioning that is I gather it's being made into a telemovie with Sigourney Weaver in one of the roles. It's a contemporary fiction, and it's tough going because it deals a lot with physical violence and depression. But it's set beautifully in Australia. This woman just writes about the outback of Australia, and it just sings, So great books both. What was the other question? Watching.
Watching.
What have you been watching on TV or film?
Oh my God. I love BritBox. I absolutely adore BritBox. So I'm pretty well on that all the time. I've just watched, and you've probably both seen this, Our Kind of Traitor with Ewan McGregor and is it Damien Lewis? Excellent spy. Oh, great. You should see it. Really good. I watched D.I. Ray right through, binged that, quite enjoyed it, but then found it a bit insipid at the end. And I've binged Great Canal Journeys, and there's a reason for that. I mean, partly because the scenery has been wonderful. And I found I really, really like Prunella Scales and Timothy West. They were a great couple, and she was in the process of going downhill with dementia. And they used to talk about it a lot on board the narrowboats as they were touring around the world. And it sort of gives you hope when you're in your 70s that dementia needn't be as horrible as you hear about on the media. I mean, I don't know what their private life is like, but she was handling these narrowboats really well. And of course, they're not doing it now. Now it's Sheila Hancock and Giles Brandreth, and they're wonderful as well. But these presenters, they're so filled with knowledge of literature, and they introduced me back to poetry, and they introduced me back to Shakespeare and so many things. You know, I just love that series, and I think it's probably a series that I will keep watching on a loop. It was just superb. So that's about it, really, on viewing. Yeah.
Okay. What about you, Stephen? What have you been watching and reading?
Two of you maybe know about it's a magazine, two magazines actually, Medieval Warfare and Ancient Warfare.
Yeah.
I think they've changed one of them now to be called Medieval World or something. But I subscribe to both of those, the digital versions, because they're only like a tenner for three, like a quarter. So I subscribe to both of those, and I read them on the Kindle. So I've been reading a couple of those this week because it's so hard to find time to do research and stuff. So I'm kind of forcing myself to get through the back issues. And I watched the new Game of Thrones thing last night, episode 1.
House of the Dragon.
House of the Dragon.
And?
I never really liked it, to be perfectly honest, but it's the first episode.
Wow.
I did like the main Game of Thrones seasons, even right up to the last one that everybody else hates. I thought were really good. So I'll stick with House of the Dragon and see how it goes, but I wasn't that impressed with it, the first episode. And I know you also watched it as well, Matthew.
Yeah, so I watched it on your recommendation, really, because you said that Game of Thrones was great, and I only watched the first season of Game of Thrones, and I don't know, I kind of lost it, and then at some point it just becomes too much to catch up with again. When there's like 4 or 5 seasons or something.
Yeah, it takes a long time.
I just can't dedicate the next 6 months of my life to try and watch all these episodes, and mainly because my wife wasn't interested because it was so violent and there's so much violence going on. She just doesn't want to watch that stuff. So if I wanted to watch it, I'd have to go and watch it on my own, and then you've got to kind of carve out a time specifically for that rather than sitting down watching telly with my wife, which seemed like too much hard work. So I'd not seen it for ages. I read the first book, I loved it, and I love fantasy, and I love sort of the whole action and adventure thing. So I thought, well, I'll try and get in the ground floor with House of the Dragon and watch it. And I watched the first episode with my wife, and she was, when it started, it said, warning, there is sexual violence, there's dismemberment, swearing, rape, murder, a pillage. I mean, it's like the list of things that it said that it has, some scenes that the viewers may consider disturbing. My wife kind of rolled her eyes and I said, look, if you don't want to watch it after a while, don't. She made it about halfway through and then just walked out of the room. So anyway, it's very well made, big budget, great production values and everything. Everybody involved is good. The actors and everything, it all looks wonderful, but it just feels like very generic fantasy. It's like lots, we need a sex scene, but it's really gratuitous. It's like, okay, tick, we'll have a scene just in a brothel or something. We'll just quickly have some sex and nakedness, brilliant. We'll have a really violent scene. Well, let's have some people getting dismembered and some really we'll tick, we'll have a bit of that. Well, we need a dragon. Let's have a couple of scenes of dragons flying around. Yeah, tick. It felt very much like that, squeezed into a bit of a kind of a hackneyed plot of skullduggery in this sort of pseudo medieval.
Well, there you go. I don't have to watch it now.
I mean, I think all of those things that I was saying are probably huge draws for many, many people to watch it. I think lots of young people are going to be going, wow, I want to see more of that. But it just felt a little bit it just feels generic, really. It doesn't feel bad. It just feels like it's not doing anything special. And in terms of reading, I've been listening to an audiobook, which I've kind of gone off the boil with, actually. I just realized that I haven't listened to it for a few days, so I was getting a bit bored with it. I think it's called Dragon Teeth or Dragon's Teeth by Michael Crichton. Michael Crichton wrote many books and directed things and did all sorts of stuff. So he did Westworld and he did Jurassic Park, and I think this is probably his first foray into the thing of dinosaurs. So, but it was released posthumously, and I can see why. I think it's not a very great book. I think he wrote it like in 1974 or something. So I think he probably just never managed to get it published when he was alive, and then moved on to bigger and better things. It feels like it was an early work that they've now just dragged out of some bottom drawer and said, let's get that out there.
We can make some money here.
It's it's based on a real period in history and a real sort of series of events, I think, loosely based on, I'm assuming. But it's about, there were basically dinosaur bones being discovered in the American West during the Indian Wars and all the things that were going on. It's 1870, 1880, I can't remember the exact date. And so just after the Civil War, and there's people going out and digging up these bones, and there's like infighting between the different paleontologists and all of that sort of stuff going on. So kind of interesting, but I'm really interested in the American West. But the way it's told, it feels almost like a very detailed synopsis for a novel rather than a novel, if that makes sense. It feels like the narration is just like, so, and then we went here and it was a big city, and then we went here and this happened, and then I saw so-and-so, and then he said this. It feels almost like this is a description that he was making to someone, saying, right, this is the book I want to write, but it's never been properly written. That's how it feels a little bit. And watching, I've watched, I've obviously watched House of the Dragon, but I also watched the movie King Richard, the famous, made extra famous by Will Smith slapping Chris Rock at the Oscars when he won the Oscar for it. It's all about,
he won an Oscar for slapping Chris Rock.
He won an Oscar for slapping Chris Rock. Yeah. So it's all about this Venus Williams and Serena Williams and their father Richard Williams, who propelled them into, or had a plan to get them to be famous world.
My wife watched that. I think she was quite impressed by how good it was.
It's a really nice movie. It's a really good movie. Solid sort of family dynamics, and how much of it is true, I don't know. But as all of the people involved are still alive, you'd imagine it's quite, at least reasonably true to reality, or else it would be difficult to tell the story completely fictitiously. It's interesting. It's worth a watch, definitely. And that's it. I think we've answered all of our questions.
Well, no, we've not done the listening to. I don't know if Prue wants to. He maybe doesn't want to or not. But have you been listening to anything good, Prue?
Do you listen to music at all? Are you a big music fan?
Music. Oh, look, you'd hate me because you two chaps are so heavy metal and rock. I am so bland, honestly. And I just listen to quiet, gentle music, ballet music, because I do ballet. So I don't think you'd like my music taste.
So sort of classical music then is sort of the sort of thing you listen to?
Love classical music. Look, I'm just as happy listening to a bit of plain chant. It wouldn't worry me at all. I like world music. I love Bollywood music. Don't judge me.
My wife likes that as well.
Music's good. Any music's good.
Any music that makes you feel good, and I love the kind of music my mum and dad used to listen to. I make up Spotify playlists and let them poodle away while I'm just beetling around the house. So, yeah.
So what about?
Sorry.
No, I was just going to say, Stephen, what's he been listening to? Have you been listening to anything new?
American band Leonard Skinner.
Oh, right. So not new then.
Even I know that.
Yeah, exactly. Sweet Home Alabama, Freebird, this kind of stuff. Because I got a new guitar a couple of weeks ago, and the Leonard Skinner guitarist, well, one of them, they've got three, he uses a similar guitar. So I've just been watching him just to see how he played his. So some brilliant songs, really good live as well. I definitely recommend them to anyone that likes a good rock song. Yeah. What about you, Matthew? What a Queen is it this week?
No, not this week.
Oh, yes, please. Yes,
please. That's what I always answer. That's why Stephen's making fun of me. But no, so just yesterday I kind of had a bit of a binge listening to a random thing. I heard I regularly or semi-regularly listen to what's it, the Charismatic Voice that does a breakdown, the YouTube video, YouTube opera singer that she breaks down performances of other people singing, and she looks at quite a lot of sort of classic rock, and it's great because I used to sing in a band, and I love singing, and it makes me think about, you know, the way that different singers do things, and it also often attracts me either to something I've not listened to before, or it's kind of draws me back to listen to a band that I've sort of neglected for a while. And she did a deep dive on Ian Gillan's performance of Gethsemane from Jesus Christ Superstar, from the album that came out before, that was released by Andrew Lloyd Webber and Tim Rice before the film was made and before the musical was made, because they couldn't afford to make the musical or the film, so they just put out this record, and Ian Gillan from Deep Purple recorded the part of Jesus, and his singing in that is just incredible. I mean, so I listened to that over and over again, and it made me weep. It was so good. It's just wow.
He's got some voice. Yeah.
Just what a voice. And then I kind of went on a deep dive of the song Gethsemane, because I've seen the production live a few years ago when Tim Minchin was actually Judas in it. So there's an Australian link there. And a guy called Ben Foster was Jesus, and he was amazing, you know, and seeing it live was incredible. And so I listened to that version, and I went and listened to different versions, Michael Ball. I even listened to a Spanish version, Camilo Sesto from the 70s, when they did it in Spain. And I just listened to all these different versions of that song, Gethsemane, which is just an incredible song, and just, yeah, amazing, really, how and so emotional. And when singers can hit the incredible high notes that apparently Ian Gillan, I think, ad-libbed in the original one, which then everybody's tried to emulate, or most singers have tried to emulate, and not managed to.
He does that quite a lot.
Do it as well as him, but stuff. Yeah, incredible.
Yeah, well, he's got an amazing voice. The high notes in Child in Time.
Yes, I think it was Child in Time that made Andrew Lloyd Webber and Tim Rice ask him to record.
Right.
They heard that his rendition in that his singing, and they just said, "Why we got to?" And apparently they wanted him in the movie, but he asked for £250,000 in 1973 or something to appear in the movie. Wow. And they said, no way, because at the time that was like a quarter of the budget for the whole movie or something. But he was in Deep Purple, and they were touring the world, and they were huge. And he said, look, the band's going to have to go on hiatus for 6 months, so we need to basically pay the band for me to do it. And they said, we can't afford it. So that's it. So he didn't do it. That's it. Well, thank you very much, Prue, for joining us. It's been a pleasure.
It's an absolute pleasure, and it's so lovely to meet you, even if it is over the airwaves. It's just a real honour, actually. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, the honour's all ours. Thanks for coming. It's been brilliant to meet you as well. And I said it, you know, at the beginning of the interview, and I say it again now. It's just so amazing that we can talk to people thousands of miles away. And I mean, it's just incredible.
Yeah, the other side of the world. Yeah.
Such a small place now, really.
Oh, congrats to you two too for having the chutzpah to get up and do this. I really admire you. So it's just another little string to your bow.
Yeah, it's good fun.
That's just it's just keeps us out of mischief.
Just busy, extra busy.
Exactly.
Okay.
Well, thanks very much for coming on, and
thank
good luck
you
with everything. Good luck with the writing. Good luck with the farm.
Thanks, Matthew.
Else.
Thank you. And to you too.
Thank you, Prue.
That's it for today's episode. We hope you've enjoyed it. Please let us know if you have any questions or things you'd like us to cover in future episodes. You can contact us on the Facebook page, which is facebook.com/rockpaperswordspodcast, or on Twitter, which is twitter.com, and we are at rock_swords. You can find out more about our books on MatthewHarvey.com and StephenAMackay.com. We're also both on Twitter ourselves and on Facebook, and we love to hear from readers and listeners, so drop by and say hi. The theme music is written and performed and copyrighted by us. Until next time, a Rock, Paper, Swords, it's goodbye from me, Matthew Harvey.
And it's goodbye from me, Stephen A. Mackay.
And remember, whatever action and adventure you have going on in your life, be kind, stay safe, and happy reading.